Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the content update for patch 4.2 Shadows of Change with regards to Kislev and what Creative Assembly is going to add for them. They've also given us a release date for this patch. It will be launching on February 22nd on Thursday, next Thursday. So we will be able to play with all of the new additions and hopefully some campaign changes, gameplay changes. They haven't talked at all about that. They've talked about the new units, they've talked about the new lords, they've talked about the new heroes, but they haven't talked about any kind of balancing changes, fixes, or anything like that. Though hopefully, and most assuredly, some of those will be coming. I personally will judge patch 4.2 by those additions, not by all the new units, heroes, and lords that they're adding. Because there's a lot of problems in Warhammer 3, and while I understand that there's plenty of people who care about units, lords, and heroes, I personally care about the overall effort that Creative Assembly is putting in the game. Especially with Thrones of Decay coming out as the next DLC, and the races there, the Dwarves, the Empire, Nurgle, do need significant changes in how they play in a campaign to be worthwhile. But regardless, Creative Assembly does spend a good amount of time talking about Kislev 8th edition lore and IP. Basically, this is to justify certain things that aren't coming with updates over here. So, so this is really related to Astankia and Hag Mothers as lore choices, and why they're doing certain things in a certain way with regards to Kislev. I do find that interesting. What you should take from this particular blog post is what they're not adding indicates to me that this is what Creative Assembly is going to add in, or rather, Games Workshop is going to add in the old world for the Ungol-Gospodar split for Kislev. Because if you know the lore, you know that Boris Ursus reformed Kislev's military, and that's the military, that's the unit roster that we're playing around with. Before that, Kislev was a very different, in a very different state of affairs in the Warhammer world. And obviously this leaves open the possibility of Creative Assembly doing things differently if they were ever to release a Total War old world version for the Warhammer games. Now, they talk about Kislev Edition, so we get the Lore of Hag, 6 new spells, and a lore attribute focusing on both hexing enemy units and overcasting to bless your own. So, with respect to the lore of the Hag, the lore of Hags really, Hag Lore, whatever, what we get here is a bit interesting, because we get curses. The basic spell is a curse, the overcast spell is a blessing, which meshes well with Astankia's campaign dynamic. You have curses and you have blessings. By the way, those curses and those blessings, those items that you craft, those do need a change. That's one of the things that I would be interested in seeing what Creative Assembly is going to do with that. Because right now, the way you play Astankia is you spend every turn of the campaign just crafting those. And you're not even interested in the effects. You're just crafting them because you want to get as many of them crafted to open up major campaign spells as quickly as possible. But regardless, so we get various blessings and curses, negative, debuffing enemy, buffing allied troops, so damaging enemies, damaging units in its path, and also applies a contact effect, which heals them, boosts their vigor, so we get the healing effect, we get magical attacks, armor-piercing missile damage, mace missile damage, or debuff on the enemy. This is good, does work well. Personally, I probably would still use a lot of Lore of Shadows, but that would just be me. I'm curious to see how Astankia is going to play with this. What kind of spells will she have access to herself? Because they're not talking about that. They talk about the overall lore, but will Astankia have access to this? Will this be her baseline lore, or will that be different? Well, that is Astankia over there, isn't it? Regardless, though, actually, that is not Astankia, in my bad. That is not Astankia, that's just a regular Hag. So that's with regards to new lore. A new lore choice in the Druzina, so basically minor nobles based on the historical Druzina over here. So we have a Druzina Lord, and they're going to use this to justify for Astankia, because they're more tied to Ungols than Gospodar, though obviously they can be Gospodars as well. They're a Hybrid Lord, not really sure how well this is gonna work. The problem with ranged lords and heroes is the way ranged combat works. This is why I'm interested in gameplay changes with the patch, because ranged combat in general really could use an update. This is a hybrid lord, so you get an armor-piercing damage dealer in melee, and in range, you get missile unit enhancement, so this is going to be extremely useful for the Khazar armies, the Akshina armies, the Ice Guard armies, the Streltsy armies, incredibly useful, especially due to ammo replenishment, which is a very significant and useful ability that usually you find with heroes, like the Dwarf Engineers. Then we get the Golden Knight. I'll be honest, with regards to the Golden Knight, you know what I'm thinking about here when I'm reading all of this? It's like tall, powerfully built, a physical equal of any mighty warrior. Yeah, this is Brienne of Tarth of Kislev. That's really what this is. Okay, fair enough. Good enough inspiration in regards to that. Her father died at the side of Tsar Boris, and she learned swordcraft from him. Okay, all well and good. And we get art for this, and we actually do get to see how she looks over there. But yeah, she's wearing a helmet. You know what? I'm very much in favor of characters wearing full armor, including a helmet. Makes sense. Heavily armored, really good looking over there. She's a bodyguard, so she gets exceptional protector, using her defensive abilities and stats to increase the durability of nearby friendly lords and heroes. Exactly what is that going to mean? More physical resistance, damage reduction? We don't know. She gets inspiration, so the more damage she takes, the more determined surrounding friendly units become to fight on. So leadership benefit for Kislev. Kislev already has incredible leadership, because when their units are about to break, they become unbreakable for a short period of time. So I'm not sure this is really important for Kislev, to be honest. Maybe for 2v2 matches or with allied units, absolutely, but with a full Kislev army, not really sold on that necessarily. She does get duelist, so you get a legendary hero that is a good fighter in dueling, which is actually something Kislev needs in a hero situation in general, because Patriarchs, yeah, they can hold their own, but they're obviously not going to be winning duels. So having a dedicated dueling hero can be particularly useful, especially if you're playing Catherine, because she obviously lacks that. And even Kastaltin, or even Mother Astanka. It's only Boris Ursus who has that strong melee ability. This is one of the things that is significantly lacking. Kislev, we're getting this with a legendary hero. It's not the best solution, but at least it does help you, because most fights you will have in a campaign will be against armies that aren't necessarily going to be that big of a threat. So even just one hero can really help fill that gap. And obviously this is important for multiplayer. The things I've been told from someone who worked in Creative Assembly is that Creative Assembly focuses on the tournament mode, if you will. Not sure how important any of this is for multiplayer, so please let me know. If you're someone who plays a lot of multiplayer, I would like to hear your thoughts on this subject with Kislev's roster. And then we get the Kislevite Warriors, and they say not every unit in DLC needs to be a centerpiece monster, and they're basically adding a tier 1 infantry halberd unit for Kislev that is going to be cheap. Now this is important because Kislev does need cheap units. Their economy is really bad, so having a chaff, basically, a unit just to fill up your armies with that's very cheap, can work. The question I have is, are these guys going to be able to win battles on their own? Because, yeah, you can play Kislev, which is Khazars, and that does work, but really you want to get armored Khazars, like a good balance between Khazars and armored Khazars. Will I be replacing the armored Khazars and Kislev armies with these guys, or will they just be an irrelevant unit like Spearmen or for the Empire right now? Because no one really recruits Spearmen for the Empire. That is one of the problems there. Don't know how this is going to play out for multiplayer, but they are cheap, so just chaff units, anti-large frontline troops. They get more entities than any other Kislev infantry unit. But yeah, these guys are just basically Imperial Spearmen for Kislev. They don't have any kind of anti-infantry or armor-piercing benefit. All they do have is an anti-large, so, you know, some flank protection over there. By the way, this is important because Kislev does not have a good anti-large unit, a good anti-large melee infantry unit. Yes, they have Khazars, armored Khazars, armored Khazars with great weapons, but they don't have a unit that can withstand the charge by cavalry. Obviously, these guys are not going to go up against Chaos Knights and survive, but against cheaper cavalry at the lower tier could be useful, especially, you know, all the hounds, all the Chaos Hounds that you might be facing, all the wolf rats that you might be facing, all that can be useful to have a couple of these guys, I imagine, for flank protection. Though they don't have any kind of missile defenses, but they don't need it because most of the opponents you're fighting as Kislev are focused on the melee infantry as opposed to ranged infantry, except Skaven, sure, greenskins to an extent, regardless. Then we get a new unit and mount choice. So we get an individual unit, we get a Frostworm. This is a bit different though than the one that Norska uses. So we get a single entity monster that by the looks of it is on foot, does seem to be fairly durable. This does address one complaint a lot of people had, that all the Kislev characters were riding warbears. Well, the Ice Witches and Katrin can get the Frostworm as a mount. Fast, with frostbite attacks, and a mount option for Katrin and Ice Witches. I think this does add some variety. How useful it will be, I don't know. It could be useful in a siege. I imagine it would have siege attackers, so this could really help you out in that. But see, the problem is, Kislev really needs a way to break down walls of settlements with a unit. That's one of the things that Kislev actually needed with this DLC and didn't get. You know, if this unit would have Wall Breaker and would be available at tier 3, that would be useful, but I'm not sure. And besides, it's compared to Hydra and Stegodon, so it might not be tier 3, it might be tier 4. Not quite sure how that's going to play out. And finally, Katrin gets her sled over here, her unique sled that only she can use. So she's pulled by it's pulled by 6 of the finest seeds that Kislev has to offer, not bears by the sounds of it. The Ice Court sled is the quickest way for Katrin to move around the battlefield, so she can move around and actually use this as basically her own war sled, just sniping around with Ice Guard crew. Now, interesting point to make about the Ice Guard, they slow enemy units. So this might be very, very powerful and actually make Katrin useful. Because if you can slow down certain enemy units of the enemy army, this can become very useful. And also, by looks of it, with the Indomitable, it might have a lot of mass, or momentum regardless, to push through enemy formations and just be extremely useful. That's what heavy war sleds can already do, by the way. And finally, you can also see here, like, these are all the units that they added initially. This is, if we just move, hold on a second, this is all we are getting, all of these units. So that's a sled right there. Let me see if I can, no. Can't bring up that image. Maybe if I scroll in over here, right here. So we can see the war sled over there. Yes, it is actually horses. We can see the Druzina. We can see the Centigors of Tzeentch. We can see the new Halberdiers. We can see the new Cafean hero, the new Tzeentch hero, the new Tzeentch Lord, the Frostworm, the fancy bird, and also the new legendary hero. That's a giant saber right there. That is a ridiculously sized weapon. Holy crap, that's a nice saber. That looks great. She does have a shield, interestingly. Makes sense, though. Makes perfect sense that she would have a shield, so she's gonna be very difficult to snipe if we're looking at it. I'm kind of curious to see what kind of mount options she might have. Like, if we, let me just scroll out over here so I can read on this a bit more just to check it out. Like, she only has a warhorse. What, really, a warhorse? You're not giving her a war bear? I mean, I guess I would say this is a bit overreaction, really. Anyone who was a bodyguard for Berserkers should have a bear as a mount. So she's only gonna get the puny warhorse. Okay, CA, okay, fair enough. I think, like, CA to an extent is overreacting. I think the bear would have made her more useful. Though it's probably better to some extent, if you really want her to go dueling, to actually have her on foot. Regardless, I do find some of these choices interesting. The new lore of magic, yeah, that I will admit I do like what I'm seeing with respect to that. I do feel Kislev doesn't have an army issue. believe it or not. You might talk about variety with mounts and all that, sure, fair enough, but Kislev's issue is with economy and artillery. Like, little Groms do make it work in terms when you do get them, but they're tier 4. Like, if they were reduced to tier 3, we wouldn't have this problem. That's one of the things I would personally like to see. Like, I wouldn't mind heavy war sleds if those were available at tier 4, but as long as I can get, like, little Groms at tier 3. I don't need a lot of them. I just need 1 or 2 of them per army to break down walls and give me flexibility in siege battles. As awful as they are. But regardless, that's all I had to say. Quistine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.